Thanks for joining me on episode 655 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
Hello, my friend. This is Dr. Brad Miller from the Pathway to Promise podcast. If you'd like to stay inspired, to stay on your pathway to promise, you can't do better than listening to the Inspired Stewardship podcast with my friend, Scott Mader.
Refocus on what's most important to you. Gain control of your mind and your behavior and your habits by developing systems and processes, and put them into place by developing and setting a plan. And as you do this, your character gets magnified large out into the world, and you show people who you really are with your money as well as everything else. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world. In today's episode about impacting the world through stewarding your treasures, I talk with you about why the power of money to magnify your character is so important, why that can happen regardless of the amount of money that we're talking about, and why it's important to recognize. As we talk about stewarding your treasures, wouldn't it be great if you could support this podcast and do it without costing yourself an extra dime? Turns out you can. All you have to do is use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon when you're ready to make a purchase via Amazon, and a small commission will come back to support the show. If you enjoy the show when you're ready to buy from Amazon, just use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the power of money as a magnifying glass. You know, the interesting thing about money is it often, in some ways, magnifies what we already find in our character. If you have a tendency to be disorganized and lackadaisical about things, then that shows up in your money as well. If you have a tendency to be a very caring person, that shows up in your money as well. If you have a tendency to be somebody who doesn't have good boundaries and allows other people to come in and affect what you do and what you think very easily, that shows up in your money. If you have a tendency to want to do everything really quickly without thinking or without planning, that shows up. If you're somebody who overanalyzes and takes every step 37 times before you do anything, that shows up in your money. Often when I'm working with people as a financial coach, as we go through the budget, as we begin to look at what's going on with their money and what's happened to get them into the situation that they're in, the truth is the budget isn't all that important. What is so important is the story the numbers tell us. Because the truth is that money begins to tell us a story. What you spend your money on, how you spend your time and your money tells us a ton about how you think, how you view the world, what you believe, what you value. It magnifies your character in a very real way. It takes what you are at your core and magnifies it. If you suddenly come into money, that happens even more so. It's why you see people that are good people, that are caring people, and they get money and they become more caring and more good, and they make a larger impact in that way. And if you see somebody who's greedy and they get a lot of money, they still are greedy. In fact, they're even greedier, and that money begins to serve that greed. If there's somebody that is got boundary issues, those boundary issues get even worse. If it's somebody who has mindset issues, those mindset issues become even larger because the money simply allows them the freedom to act out in a larger way what they were already doing. It makes it bigger. That's why I use the term magnify. And the truth is, this can happen regardless of the amount of money you have. Having a lot of money simply makes it more obvious because it makes what you do bigger. But even if you're talking about an extra $100 that you come in, how that $100 is played out in your life has a lot to do with the habits and the mindsets and the character that you've set up in advance. It's one of the reasons why it's so important to work on your money regardless of how much you have. I don't care if you make $250,000 a month, or if you make $250,000 a year, or if you make $25,000 a year. What you do with your money is important because it begins to build those habits. It begins to build the mindset. It begins to allow you to identify what's really important to you and then begin to put your money in alignment with that. Regardless of the amount of money you have, money is going to magnify your character. It simply magnifies it larger, the larger the amount of money. This is so important to recognize, not because you're necessarily going to win the lottery tomorrow and have $1 million or $1 billion or $1 trillion or whatever it is handed to you, but because the truth is, as you begin to identify this and begin to reorder your life and your character in alignment with your money, what happens is, by definition, you begin to have more successes. You begin to have more money. I've never worked with a client where at some point they didn't look up and go, I feel like I got a raise. Not because I actually am making more money, but because I'm paying attention. And because I'm paying attention, I'm noticing things that I didn't notice before. And in noticing them and paying attention to them, they begin to change what they do to more closely align with what's really important. You know, if you most value spending time with your family, then you begin to look at your money decisions and say, is this moving me towards being able to spend more time with my family? If you most value freedom and flexibility, is this allowing me to be more free and more flexible? If you value being able to travel, is using my money in this way helping me with that larger goal of being able to travel? See, a lot of it is about stepping back and identifying who you are, what's important to you, what do you love about who you are, and what do you want to change about who you are? And as you do that, then you begin to bring the money into alignment with that. And almost inevitably, more money comes. I've seen it happen time after time. It's not magic. It's just as you live in alignment and as you pay attention, that's what's going to happen. It's important to recognize this and build off of this. It's important to start it early. I've worked with teenagers all the way through to senior citizens. I've worked with people that make less than $30,000 a year and people that make almost $300,000 a month. And in all cases, the decisions that we're making are different. The things we're talking about are different, but the underlying idea is the same. Refocus on what's most important to you. Gain control of your mind and your behavior and your habits by developing systems and processes, and put them into place by developing and setting a plan. And as you do this, your character gets magnified large out into the world, and you show people who you really are with your money as well as everything else. Thanks for listening. Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of treasures, you can sign up for our treasures tips by going to inspiredstewardship.com/treasures or text in the U.S. 44222 treasures tips. And we'll send you 5 weeks of our best tips on stewarding your treasures. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.